Kim Jong-un walked through the marble corridors of his private residence in Pyongyang, his polished shoes clicking against the pristine floor. It was a typical Tuesday morning, or at least it was supposed to be. He had just finished reviewing military reports and was heading to his private study when he heard something unusual. A woman's voice echoed softly from one of the adjacent rooms, speaking in fluent English with what sounded like an American accent. He stopped abruptly, his hand freezing on the ornate door handle. The Supreme Leader's household staff were carefully selected, thoroughly vetted, and trained to speak only Korean in his presence. Hearing English spoken so freely was not just unusual, it was unprecedented. He moved closer to the source of the voice, his curiosity overriding his usual stern demeanor. Through the slightly open door of the cleaning supply room, he could see one of the newer maids, a young woman named Ji-sun, speaking animatedly into a mobile phone. Her voice was confident and her pronunciation was impeccable. "Yes, I understand completely. The package should arrive by Thursday at the latest," she said, completely unaware of his presence. Kim Jong-un felt a mixture of surprise and intrigue. How had this woman learned such perfect English? Where did she get a mobile phone capable of international calls? And most importantly, who was she talking to? He stood there for a moment, listening intently, trying to piece together the conversation. The maid continued, "I'll make sure everything is in place. Don't worry, nobody suspects anything." That last phrase sent a chill down his spine. Was this espionage? Was there a security breach in his own household, or was it something entirely innocent? He decided not to confront her immediately. Instead, he would observe, investigate, and discover the truth himself. As he quietly backed away from the door, his mind raced with possibilities. This unexpected discovery had transformed an ordinary morning into the beginning of something far more complex. He returned to his study, but his thoughts were no longer on military reports or economic plans. They were fixated on the maid who spoke perfect English and the mysterious conversation he had overheard. He pressed a button on his desk, summoning his head of security. Within minutes, General Pak entered the room, bowing respectfully. "Supreme Leader, how may I serve you?" Kim Jong-un leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. "I need you to conduct a discreet investigation into one of the household staff. Her name is Ji-sun. I want to know everything about her, her background, her family, her education, and most importantly, I want to know who she's been communicating with." General Pak's expression remained neutral, but Kim could see the slight tension in his jaw. "Of course, Supreme Leader, may I ask what prompted this request?" Kim Jong-un paused before answering. "I overheard her speaking fluent English on a phone call. She mentioned a package arriving on Thursday and said that nobody suspects anything. I want to know what she's hiding." The general nodded sharply. "I will begin the investigation immediately. We will have answers for you within 48 hours. As General Pak left the room, Kim Jong-un stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Pyongyang stretched out before him, orderly and controlled, just as he liked it. But now, within the walls of his own residence, there was uncertainty, and he didn't like uncertainty. He needed answers, and he would get them. The next morning, Kim Jong-un went about his usual routine, but everything felt different now. He attended a meeting with his economic advisors, reviewed agricultural production reports, and inspected a new housing development on the outskirts of Pyongyang. But throughout it all, his mind kept returning to the maid and her mysterious phone call. He found himself watching the household staff more carefully, noticing details he had previously overlooked. When he returned to his residence that evening, General Pak was waiting for him with a preliminary report. They met in Kim's private office, a secure room where sensitive conversations could take place without fear of eavesdropping. "What have you discovered?" Kim asked, settling into his leather chair. General Pak opened a folder and began reading. "Jae-sun Kim, age 26, hired 6 months ago as part of the household cleaning staff. She comes from a family of loyal party members. Her father was a decorated military officer who died in service 5 years ago. Her mother is a teacher at a state school in Hamhung. According to her official records, she attended Kim Il-sung University, where she studied literature and graduated with honors." Kim Jong-un listened intently, his expression unreadable. "And her English skills, where did she learn to speak like an American?" The general flipped to another page. "According to her university records, she never took advanced English courses. Her curriculum focused primarily on Korean literature and political theory. There's no official explanation for her language proficiency." "That's what I thought," Kim said quietly. "What about the phone? Have you traced her calls?" General Pak's expression darkened slightly. "That's where things become more complicated. Supreme Leader, the phone she was using is not registered in our system. It appears to be a smuggled device, possibly from China. We are working to trace the call, but it will take time. These devices use encryption and routing that make them difficult to track." Kim Jong-un stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "I want to know who she was talking to and what this package is that's supposed to arrive on Thursday. Increase surveillance on her, but do it discreetly. I don't want her to know we're watching. Understood. Supreme Leader, we have already placed audio monitoring in her quarters and assigned agents to follow her movements outside the residence. Kim turned back to face the general. Good, but I also want you to arrange something else. I want to speak with her directly, but not as the Supreme Leader conducting an interrogation. I want to observe her in a natural setting, see how she behaves when she thinks nobody important is watching. General Pak looked confused. How do you propose we do that, Supreme Leader? A slight smile crossed Kim Jong-un's face. Tomorrow, I will take an unannounced tour of the household facilities. I will speak with the staff casually, including Gi-san. Let's see if she reveals anything when she's caught off guard. The general nodded, though his expression suggested he had reservations about this approach. As you wish, Supreme Leader, I will make the necessary arrangements. After General Pak left, Kim Jong-un sat alone in his office, thinking. He realized that this situation intrigued him far more than it probably should. There was something about the mystery, about the unexpected disruption to his carefully controlled world, that awakened a part of him that had been dormant for years. He was genuinely curious about this woman, about her secrets, and about what her story might reveal about the world beyond his immediate control. The following afternoon, Kim Jong-un made his unannounced visit to the household facilities. He was accompanied only by a single aide, deliberately keeping the entourage small to avoid creating too much formality. The staff were surprised by his appearance, scrambling to stand at attention and bow respectfully. He waved them back to their duties with a casual gesture. Please, continue your work. I simply wanted to see how things are running and perhaps speak with some of you about your experiences here. He walked through the kitchen, the laundry facilities, and the storage rooms, asking questions and making small talk. The staff seemed nervous but gradually relaxed as he maintained a friendly, informal tone. Finally, he entered the cleaning supply room where he had first overheard Ji-sun's conversation. She was there, organizing bottles of cleaning solution on a shelf. When she saw him, her eyes widened in shock, and she immediately bowed deeply. Supreme Leader, I had no idea you would be here. Please forgive the disorder. Kim Jong-un smiled reassuringly. There's no disorder here. Everything looks quite organized actually. You're Ji-sun, correct? She nodded, keeping her eyes lowered respectfully. Yes, Supreme Leader. How long have you been working here? He asked, maintaining a casual conversational tone. 6 months, Supreme Leader. It is the greatest honor of my life to serve you and our glorious nation. He noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. Was it simply nervousness at being addressed by the Supreme Leader, or was it something more? And you enjoy the work? He continued. Very much, Supreme Leader. I take great pride in maintaining your residence to the highest standards. Kim Jong-un picked up a bottle of cleaning solution, examining it as if genuinely interested. Tell me, Ji-sun, what did you study before you came to work here? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. I studied literature at Kim Il-sung University. Supreme Leader. Ah, literature. What languages did you study? Again, that tiny hesitation. Primarily Korean literature, Supreme Leader, though we had some exposure to Russian and Chinese works and translation. No English? He asked, watching her face carefully. Her composure slipped for just a moment, a flicker of concern crossing her features before she regained control. Only basic English, Supreme Leader, as part of the general curriculum. He nodded thoughtfully, setting down the bottle. I see. Well, it's good to meet you, Ji-sun. Keep up the excellent work. Thank you, Supreme Leader. It is my honor to serve. As he walked away, he was more convinced than ever that there was something she was hiding. The way she had hesitated, the brief flash of concern when he mentioned English, all of it confirmed his suspicions. But what was she hiding, and why? That evening, General Pak provided an update. Supreme Leader, we have monitored Ji-sun's activities throughout the day. After your visit, she made another phone call from her quarters using the same encrypted device. What did she say? Kim asked eagerly. She spoke in English again. She said, he asked me about languages. I think he might suspect something. We need to move the timeline forward. Then the person on the other end said something we couldn't clearly hear. And she responded, I understand. I'll be ready. Kim Jong-un felt his pulse quicken. This was definitely something significant. What about the package she mentioned? Has anything suspicious been delivered? Not yet, Supreme Leader. We have increased security screening at all entry points to the residence. If anything unusual arrives, we will intercept it. Kim stood and paced the room, his mind working through the possibilities. I want to know who she's working with. Tap into every communication channel she has access to. And I want agents ready to move if this situation escalates. Yes, Supreme Leader. However, may I suggest that we simply detain her for questioning? We could resolve this matter quickly. Kim Jong-un shook his head. Not yet. I want to see where this leads. If we move too soon, we might miss the bigger picture. Continue the surveillance, but do not interfere unless she poses an immediate threat. As he dismissed the general, Kim couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Some piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense. Thursday arrived, the day Ji-sun had mentioned in her first phone call as when the package would arrive. Kim Jong-un's security team was on high alert, screening every delivery with extra scrutiny. Morning passed without incident, then afternoon. As evening approached, a delivery truck arrived at the service entrance with a shipment of imported foods and supplies. The security team conducted their usual inspection, but everything appeared normal. The supplies were taken to the storage facilities, and the truck departed. An hour later, General Pak burst into Kim's office, his face flushed with urgency. "Supreme Leader, we found it. Hidden inside a container of imported rice. There was a package addressed to Ji-sun." Kim Jong-un stood immediately. "What's in it?" "Books, Supreme Leader, English language books. Novels, poetry collections, and study guides. There was also a letter." "A letter? From whom?" General Pak handed over a sealed envelope. "We haven't opened it yet. We thought you would want to examine it yourself." Kim Jong-un took the envelope, noting the careful handwriting on the outside. It was addressed simply to Ji-sun, with no return address. He carefully opened it and began to read. The letter was in English, written in an elegant, flowing script. "My dear Ji-sun, I hope this package finds you well and that my books bring you joy in your studies. Your dedication to learning our language continues to inspire me. Remember that education is a light that can never be extinguished, no matter what darkness surrounds us. The poems of Dickinson and Frost that I've sent will, I hope, give you windows into the beauty of expression that transcends borders and politics. Your mother tells me you are doing well in your new position. I am so proud of how far you've come from that curious little girl who used to visit my home and ask endless questions. Please be careful, my dear. I know your hunger for knowledge is insatiable, but the world you live in does not always reward curiosity. Stay safe. With love, Professor Margaret Chen." Kim Jong-un read the letter twice, then looked up at General Pak. "Who is Professor Margaret Chen?" The general consulted his notes. "We're investigating now, Supreme Leader. Based on preliminary information, she appears to be a retired university professor, originally from North Korea but who defected to South Korea 40 years ago. She later moved to the United States and taught English literature at various universities. She's now in her 70s and living in California. And her connection to Ji-sun, we're still piecing that together, but it appears that Professor Chen knew Ji-sun's family before her defection. She may have been a friend or mentor to Ji-sun's grandmother. According to our intelligence, they've maintained contact through intermediaries for years." Kim Jong-un sat down slowly, absorbing this information. This wasn't espionage or sabotage. This was simply a young woman trying to learn, to expand her mind beyond the boundaries of what was permitted. He looked at the stack of books that had been confiscated. The complete poems of Emily Dickinson, The Road Not Taken, and other poems by Robert Frost, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and several English language learning guides. These weren't weapons or propaganda, they were simply books. "What do you recommend we do, Supreme Leader?" General Pak asked. Kim Jong-un was silent for a long moment, staring at the letter in his hands. "Bring her to me. I want to speak with her privately." "Supreme Leader, is that wise? We don't know what her true intentions might be." "Her intentions are clear, General. She wants to learn. Bring her to my private study in 1 hour. Come alone, and make sure she understands she's not under arrest. Tell her I simply wish to have a conversation." General Pak looked deeply uncomfortable but bowed and left to carry out the order. Kim Jong-un spent the next hour reading through some of the poems in the confiscated books, finding himself unexpectedly moved by their beauty and depth. When Ji-sun arrived, escorted by General Pak, she looked terrified. Her face was pale, and her hands shook as she bowed deeply. "Supreme Leader, I beg your forgiveness for my transgressions. I have brought shame upon my family and upon your household." Kim Jong-un dismissed General Pak with a wave and gestured for Ji-sun to sit. "Please, sit down. You're not here to be punished." She sat hesitantly on the edge of the chair, her eyes still downcast. "I know about the books," he said gently. "I know about Professor Chen, and I know that you've been studying English in secret. What I want to know is why. Why take such risks?" Ji-sun's voice was barely a whisper. "Because I wanted to understand, Supreme Leader. I wanted to read the great works of literature in their original language, to understand how people in other parts of the world think and feel. Professor Chen was friends with my grandmother before she left. She promised my grandmother that she would help educate our family, and she's kept that promise by sending books and letters over the years. And the phone calls. She calls me once a month to check on me, to help me practice my pronunciation, and to discuss the books she sends. Supreme Leader, she's an old woman who simply wants to share her love of literature. There's no politics, no agenda, just a teacher and a student." Kim Jong-un studied her face, seeing the genuine passion in her eyes. "Do you understand the position this puts me in, the laws you've broken? Tears began to stream down Ji-sun's face. Yes, Supreme Leader. I understand completely. I'm prepared to face whatever punishment you deem appropriate. I only ask that you don't punish my family. They knew nothing of this. He leaned back in his chair, considering his options. He could have her arrested, make an example of her to reinforce the rules. But as he looked at this young woman who had risked everything simply to learn, he felt something unexpected. Admiration. Kim Jong-un stood and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down a worn volume of Korean poetry. When I was young, he began, I was sent to Switzerland for my education. I lived in a world very different from this one, surrounded by ideas and perspectives that challenged everything I had been taught. It was disorienting and sometimes frightening, but it was also incredibly valuable. I learned that understanding other cultures, other ways of thinking, doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger, more capable of leadership. He turned to face Ji-sun, who was watching him with a mixture of surprise and hope. I'm going to tell you something that very few people know. I still read foreign literature, philosophy, and history. Not because I agree with everything I read, but because a leader who doesn't understand the world beyond his borders is a fool. Knowledge is not the enemy, Ji-sun, ignorance is. She looked up at him, confusion evident in her expression. Supreme Leader, I don't understand. Are you saying? I'm saying that I'm not going to punish you. But I am going to make you an offer, one that must remain absolutely confidential. Her eyes widened. An offer. Kim Jong-un sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I want you to continue your studies, but I want you to share what you learn with me. Teach me about the literature you're reading, the perspectives you're gaining. In exchange, I'll provide you with protection and resources to continue your education properly. Ji-sun looked like she might faint. Supreme Leader, I can't possibly. I'm not qualified to teach you anything. You're a man who spends every day surrounded by people who tell me only what they think I want to hear. You would be the one person in my life who shares knowledge for its own sake, not for political advantage. That's extremely valuable to me. She was silent for a long moment, processing this extraordinary proposition. And Professor Chen, the books. You can continue your correspondence with her, but it will be monitored for security purposes. The books will be delivered through official channels to ensure they're not intercepted, and your phone calls will be conducted using secure equipment that I'll provide. Ji-sun's hands were shaking again, but now from excitement rather than fear. I don't know what to say, Supreme Leader. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. Say yes, and say that you'll keep this arrangement completely confidential. No one, not even your family, can know about this. As far as the world is concerned, you're simply a maid who was found to have some contraband books. You received a warning, the books were confiscated, and that was the end of it. Yes, Supreme Leader. I agree, and thank you. Thank you for this incredible opportunity. He smiled slightly. Don't thank me yet. I'm a demanding student, and I expect excellence. We'll meet twice a week in the evening, here in my private study. You'll prepare lessons on the books you're reading, and we'll discuss them. Is that acceptable? More than acceptable, Supreme Leader. It would be an honor. After Ji-sun left, Kim Jong-un sat alone in his study, wondering if he had just made a brilliant decision or a terrible mistake. He had just created a secret arrangement that, if discovered, could undermine his authority and create a scandal. But he also felt something he hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement about learning something new, about engaging with ideas in a way that wasn't filtered through political calculation. General Pak returned, looking deeply concerned. Supreme Leader, may I speak frankly? Always, General. What you're proposing is extremely dangerous. If this arrangement becomes known, it could be used against you. Your enemies would claim you're being influenced by Western propaganda, that you're not maintaining ideological purity. Kim Jong-un nodded. I'm aware of the risks. That's why this must be kept absolutely secret. Only you, I, and Ji-sun will know about these meetings. I'm trusting you to ensure that security is maintained without drawing attention. I will do my duty, Supreme Leader, but I must advise against this course of action. Your objection is noted, General. Now, make the necessary arrangements. Ji-sun's first lesson will be in 3 days. I want this room swept for any surveillance devices, and I want a secure communication line established for her calls with Professor Chen. General Pak bowed, his face troubled, but he left to carry out the orders. Kim Jong-un returned to the poetry book he had been reading, feeling a strange sense of anticipation for what was to come. 3 days later, Ji-sun arrived at Kim Jong-un's private study precisely at 8 in the evening. She carried a small bag containing books and notes, and despite the extraordinary circumstances, she looked nervous. Kim had arranged the room informally, with 2 comfortable chairs positioned near the fireplace and a small table between them for books and tea. Please, sit down, he said warmly, gesturing to one of the chairs. Would you like some tea? Yes, Supreme Leader. Thank you. She sat carefully, placing her bag beside her. He poured tea for both of them, noting her surprise at this gesture. In their society, the supreme leader was served, not the reverse, but he wanted to establish a different dynamic for these meetings, something closer to the student-teacher relationship he remembered from his time in Switzerland. So, he began, settling into his chair. What have you prepared for our first lesson? Ji-sun took a deep breath, visibly gathering her courage. I thought we might start with Emily Dickinson, Supreme Leader. She was an American poet who lived in the 19th century, and her work explores themes of death, immortality, nature, and the inner life of the mind. An unusual choice for a first lesson. Why Dickinson? Because she was a revolutionary writer who worked in isolation, much like our country. She didn't seek fame or recognition during her lifetime. She wrote because she had to express what was inside her. I thought that might resonate. Kim Jong-un was impressed by her thoughtfulness. Show me one of her poems. Ji-sun opened her book and read aloud in English, then provided her own Korean translation. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all. The simple beauty of the verse struck him immediately. She compares hope to a bird, he observed. Yes, Supreme Leader. A bird that lives inside us, and sings constantly, even in the darkest times. Dickinson often used nature imagery to express complex, emotional, and philosophical ideas. They spent the next hour discussing the poem, its meanings, and its construction. Gysin explained metaphor, meter, and the specific techniques Dickinson employed. Kim found himself genuinely engaged, asking questions and offering his own interpretations. What struck him most was the freedom of the discussion. Ji-sun, while maintaining proper respect, didn't simply agree with everything he said. She challenged his interpretations, offered alternative readings, and defended her positions with evidence from the text. It was refreshing, even exhilarating, to have a conversation that wasn't about policy or politics, but about ideas and beauty. This is fascinating, he said as their first session drew to a close. I've read poetry before, but I've never analyzed it this deeply. Ji-sun smiled shyly. Literature rewards close attention. Supreme Leader, every word matters. Every choice the writer makes has significance. That's what makes it so rich. What will you prepare for our next meeting? I thought we might explore Robert Frost, another American poet but with a very different style. His work is more accessible on the surface, but it contains profound depths. Excellent. I look forward to it. After Ji-sun left, Kim sat in the quiet study, thinking about hope as a bird that never stops singing. It was a powerful image, one that seemed to speak directly to something deep within him. In the days that followed, he found his mind returning frequently to their discussion, to the ideas they had explored. He began to see his daily activities through a slightly different lens, noticing beauty and metaphor in places he had previously overlooked. When he met with foreign dignitaries, he found himself analyzing their language more carefully, looking for the subtext beneath their diplomatic phrases. When he reviewed propaganda materials, he considered them not just for their political effectiveness but for their literary quality. General Pak noticed the change in his demeanor. Supreme Leader, you seem different lately. More reflective. Kim Jong-un smiled slightly. Perhaps I'm learning to see the world with new eyes. General, there's value in that. The second lesson arrived quickly. This time, Ji-sun brought Robert Frost as The Road Not Taken, and they discussed the famous poem about choice and its consequences. Kim was particularly struck by the final lines about taking the road less traveled, and how it made all the difference. Do you think he regrets his choice? Kim asked. The poem is ambiguous. Ji-sun explained. The speaker says he'll be telling this story with a sigh in the future. Is it a sigh of satisfaction or regret? Frost leaves that open to interpretation. But the important thing is that the speaker took the less conventional path, and that choice defined his life. Kim thought about his own life, the path that had been chosen for him from birth. What roads had he never had the chance to explore? What differences might those alternative paths have made? Supreme Leader Ji-sun said hesitantly, May I ask you a question? Of course. Why did you really decide to do this? These lessons, it's not just about learning English or understanding foreign literature, is it? He considered her question carefully before answering. When you spend your entire life being told you're exceptional, that you're destined for greatness, it becomes difficult to know who you really are beneath all those expectations. These lessons, this time with you, it allows me to be simply a student again, someone seeking knowledge rather than wielding power. Does that make sense? She nodded slowly. It makes perfect sense, Supreme Leader. Thank you for trusting me with this. As the weeks turned into months, their lessons continued, creating a secret world within the highly controlled environment of Kim's life. They explored Shakespeare, discussing the complexities of power in Macbeth and the nature of love in Romeo and Juliet. They read Jane Austen and talked about social structures and individual agency. They studied modern American poetry and debated the role of the individual versus the collective. As their lessons continued through the changing seasons, something unexpected began to develop between Kim Jong-un and Ji-sun. What had started as an intellectual arrangement gradually evolved into something more personal. They began to share stories about their lives, their fears, and their dreams. Kim told her about his years in Switzerland, the loneliness he had felt being so far from home, and the pressure he experienced knowing he would one day lead an entire nation. Ji-sun shared her own struggles. Growing up in a society where asking too many questions was dangerous, where her natural curiosity had to be constantly suppressed. Their conversations extended beyond literature to philosophy, history, and the nature of leadership itself. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't been born into your position? Ji-sun asked one evening during a discussion of fate and free will in Greek tragedy. It was a dangerous question, one that could be interpreted as challenging his legitimacy. But Kim had come to trust her completely. Every day, he admitted, "I wonder who I would have been if I had been free to choose my own path. Would I have been a teacher, perhaps, or a musician? I used to play the piano quite well when I was young." "You should play again," she suggested. "Music is another form of expression, like poetry." "Perhaps I will. Would you like to hear me play?" She looked surprised. "I would be honored, Supreme Leader." He led her to an adjacent room, where a grand piano sat, largely unused in recent years. He sat down and began to play a Chopin nocturne, his fingers finding the familiar patterns despite the years of neglect. The music filled the room, melancholy and beautiful. When he finished, he looked up to find Ji-sun with tears in her eyes. "That was beautiful, Supreme Leader, truly beautiful." Music, poetry, literature, all these things remind us that we're human, not just political figures or servants of the state. They connect us to something larger than ideology or power. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you for sharing that with me." It was in moments like these that Kim realized how isolated he had become, how much he had sacrificed for his position. Ji-sun represented something he had thought lost forever, genuine human connection based on shared interests and mutual respect rather than political necessity or fear. But this connection was also dangerous. General Pak had already expressed concerns multiple times about the amount of time the Supreme Leader was spending with a household maid. Rumors were beginning to circulate among the staff, and while no one knew the true nature of their meetings, speculation was inevitable. "Supreme Leader," General Pak said during one of their security briefings, "I must once again urge caution regarding your meetings with Ji-sun. People are beginning to notice the unusual arrangement, and there are whispers." "What kind of whispers?" Kim asked sharply. "Nothing specific yet, but the staff know that she spends hours alone with you twice a week. They're curious, and curiosity leads to speculation, which can lead to problems." Kim knew the general was right. In a society built on control and surveillance, any deviation from normal patterns attracted attention. "What do you suggest?" "Reduce the frequency of the meetings, or conduct them in a more public setting where others can observe that they're purely educational." Kim shook his head. "The privacy is essential. These discussions often touch on sensitive topics that I wouldn't want overheard. I'll consider reducing the frequency, but I won't compromise the confidentiality." That evening, he discussed the situation with Ji-sun. "General Pak believes our meetings are attracting too much attention. We may need to be more careful." Ji-sun looked troubled. "Perhaps we should stop." "Supreme Leader, I would never want to cause problems for you." "No," he said firmly. "These sessions have become too valuable to abandon, but we may need to adjust the schedule and take additional precautions." She nodded, but he could see the worry in her eyes. "Supreme Leader, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever feel trapped by your position, by the expectations and the constant surveillance?" It was a question that cut to the heart of his existence. "Every single day, I'm the most powerful person in this country, and yet I have less freedom than almost anyone. My life is not my own. Every decision I make affects millions of people. Every word I speak is analyzed and recorded. This room, these hours with you, they're the only time I can truly be myself." Ji-sun's expression was filled with sympathy and understanding. "I'm sorry you carry such a burden, Supreme Leader. But for what it's worth, I'm grateful that you've chosen to share some of that burden with me, even in this small way." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Kim realized that what he felt for her had evolved beyond simple appreciation or intellectual companionship. He cared for her deeply, in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. He stood abruptly, recognizing the danger of these feelings. "I think that's enough for tonight. We'll meet again next week." Ji-sun looked confused by the sudden dismissal but gathered her books and bowed. "Yes, Supreme Leader, good night." After she left, Kim stood at the window, looking out at the illuminated city. He was falling for her, he realized, and that was perhaps the most dangerous thing that could happen. A Supreme Leader could not afford personal attachments, especially not to someone so far below his station. It would be seen as weakness, as a betrayal of his position and responsibilities. But his heart didn't care about political considerations or social hierarchies. It only knew that Ji-sun made him feel human again, that her presence brought light into his carefully controlled but ultimately lonely existence. The situation came to a head 3 weeks later. Kim Jong-un was in a meeting with his inner council when General Pak entered with an urgent message. Supreme Leader, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a matter that requires your immediate attention. Kim excused himself and followed the general to a private room. What's happened? We've intercepted communications, suggesting that foreign intelligence services have become aware of Ji-sun and her connection to Professor Chen. They're trying to exploit this connection to gather information about your household and potentially about you personally. Kim felt his blood run cold. How much do they know? They know about the books, the phone calls, and the fact that she works in your residence. They don't yet know about your private meetings, but they're attempting to recruit her as an intelligence asset. They contacted her yesterday with an offer: continued access to books and education in exchange for information about the households, daily operations and security protocols. What was her response? She refused immediately and reported the contact to us. Her loyalty is not in question, Supreme Leader, but the very fact that she's on their radar puts both her and you at risk. Kim paced the room, his mind racing through the implications. What are my options? The safest course would be to remove her from the household entirely. Transfer her to another position far from Pyongyang, somewhere the foreign services can't easily reach her. This would also end the speculation about your relationship and eliminate any potential security vulnerability. The thought of never seeing Ji-sun again, of losing the one genuine connection he had found, was almost unbearable. But he also understood his responsibilities. And if I don't remove her, then we'll need to implement extreme security measures. All her communications would need to be monitored constantly. She would be followed everywhere, and there would still be risk, both to national security and to your reputation, if the true nature of your meetings became known. Kim stopped pacing and stood still, facing an impossible choice. Give me 24 hours to decide. In the meantime, increase her protection detail. I don't want foreign agents anywhere near her. Yes, Supreme Leader. That evening, Kim asked Ji-sun to come to his study. When she arrived, he could see that she already knew something was wrong. You've heard about the contact from foreign intelligence, he said. Yes, Supreme Leader. I reported it immediately to your security team. I want you to know that I would never betray your trust or our country. These meetings, what you've given me, it's more valuable than anything they could offer. He nodded, appreciating her loyalty but knowing it didn't solve the larger problem. I believe you completely, Ji-sun, but the situation has become complicated. Your association with me, even if purely educational, has made you a target, and that puts both of us at risk. Her face fell as she understood what he was suggesting. You want me to leave? I don't want you to leave. That's the problem. But General Pak and my security team believe it's the only safe option. They want to transfer you somewhere remote, where you'll be out of reach of foreign intelligence services. Tears began to form in Ji-sun's eyes. I understand, Supreme Leader. I've known from the beginning that this couldn't last forever. I'm just grateful for the time we've had, for everything you've taught me and allowed me to experience. I haven't made my decision yet, Kim said softly, but I need you to understand the risks. If you stay, your life will become much more restricted. You'll be under constant surveillance. Every conversation, every movement will be monitored. The freedom you've had will disappear. I don't care about that, she said intensely. These meetings, these conversations, they've meant everything to me. They've shown me that learning and growing are possible even in the most controlled circumstances. I'll accept any restrictions if it means we can continue. He walked closer to her, closer than was appropriate for their respective positions. It's not just about the educational value anymore, is it? Not for me, and I suspect not for you either. She looked up at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. No, Supreme Leader. It's become much more than that. You've become my friend, my mentor, and she hesitated, then continued bravely, and someone I care for deeply. This is impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We live in a society with strict hierarchies, with rules about who can associate with whom. What I feel for you, what we've developed here, it goes against everything I'm supposed to represent. I know, she whispered. But doesn't that make it even more precious? In a world where everything is controlled and prescribed, we've found something genuine, something real. He wanted to reach out to her, to close the distance between them, but he forced himself to maintain control. I need time to think. I need to consider all the implications and make the right decision. Not just for us, but for everyone who depends on my leadership. I understand, Supreme Leader. Whatever you decide, I'll accept it. But please know that knowing you, learning from you, seeing the person beneath the title, it's been the greatest privilege of my life. After she left, Kim sat alone in the darkness. Torn between duty and desire, between the responsibilities of his position and the needs of his heart, Kim Jong-un spent a sleepless night wrestling with his decision. He stood at his window watching the sunrise over Pyongyang, the city slowly coming to life under his rule. Every building, every street, every person below was under his authority and protection. How could he put all of that at risk for personal feelings? And yet, what was power without humanity? What was leadership without understanding the full range of human experience, including connection and love? By morning, he had made his decision. He summoned General Pak and his closest advisors for an emergency meeting. "I've considered the situation with Ji-sun," he began, "and I've made my decision. She will stay." General Pak looked alarmed. "Supreme Leader, with all due respect, that's extremely risky. The foreign intelligence services won't stop trying to reach her, and the speculation about your relationship will only grow. Which is why we're going to change the narrative," Kim said firmly. "Here's what we're going to do. Ji-sun will be publicly appointed as a cultural liaison officer for my household, with official responsibilities for maintaining my personal library and archives. This gives her a legitimate reason to spend time with me and access to educational materials. It elevates her position enough that her presence won't seem suspicious." One of his advisors spoke up. "But Supreme Leader, that still doesn't address the security concerns about foreign intelligence. We're going to address that head on. We'll plant information suggesting that we're aware of the foreign intelligence interest and that we're using GSO as a double agent, feeding them false information. This serves two purposes. It explains her continued presence in my household, and it makes the foreign services less likely to trust anything they hear from her." General Pak looked thoughtful. "That's actually quite clever, Supreme Leader, but it requires GSO to participate in the deception." "Is she capable of that?" "She's more capable than you might think, General. She's been hiding her English studies for years. She knows how to maintain a cover." "And what about the other issue?" Another advisor asked carefully. "The personal connection between you and this woman. How do we manage the perception of that?" Kim's expression hardened. "There will be no perception to manage because our relationship will remain exactly what it has always been, officially, professional and educational. My private meetings with her will continue, but they will be framed as tutoring sessions in foreign languages and culture to help me better understand the perspective of our adversaries. Any speculation beyond that will be dismissed as baseless rumor." He paused, then continued with emphasis. "Ji-sun has proven her loyalty and her value. She stays, under the conditions I've outlined. Are we clear?" The advisors exchanged glances but nodded. "Yes, Supreme Leader, we'll implement your plan." After the meeting, Kim called Gaizan to his office and explained the decision and the new arrangements. Her relief was palpable. "Thank you, Supreme Leader. I know this isn't easy, and I know you're taking risks for me. I promise I won't let you down." "I know you won't, but Ji-sun, we need to be even more careful now. Our meetings will be monitored for appearance's sake. We can't show the kind of personal connection we've developed. In front of others, you must treat me with complete formality and respect." "I understand, Supreme Leader." "Good. Your official appointment as cultural liaison will be announced tomorrow. You'll receive appropriate training and a small office in the cultural wing, but our private lessons will continue as before, just with the additional security measures." "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Over the following weeks, the new arrangement was implemented. Ji-sun moved into her new role with grace and competence, impressing the other staff with her knowledge and dedication. The cover story about her being used to feed false information to foreign intelligence added an element of intrigue that actually enhanced her status within the household. Their private lessons continued, now officially sanctioned as part of Kim's ongoing education in foreign cultures and perspectives. But the spontaneity and ease they had once enjoyed was somewhat diminished by the knowledge that their words were being recorded, their interactions scrutinized. One evening, about a month into the new arrangement, Ji-sun brought a new book to their session, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, translated into English. "This is considered one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, she explained. "It's about a family living in isolation, creating their own world, their own reality separate from the outside world." I thought it might resonate. As they discussed the magical realism of Marquez's fictional town of Macondo, Kim couldn't help but see parallels to their own situation, and indeed to North Korea itself. Here they were, creating their own isolated bubble of literature and learning, separate from the political realities that surrounded them. "The characters in this book," Kim observed, "they create their own truth, their own version of reality. But that isolation also leads to their downfall eventually. It's a cautionary tale." "Yes," Jason agreed. "But it's also beautiful in its way. They had something pure, something untouched by the corruption of the outside world. Even if it couldn't last forever." Their eyes met, and in that moment, both understood they were no longer just talking about literature. "Nothing lasts forever," Kim said quietly, "but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth having." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't mean that at all." 6 months had passed since Ji-sun's official appointment as cultural liaison. The arrangement had proven successful beyond Kim Jong-un's initial expectations. Not only had the foreign intelligence threats diminished, but Jisun had genuinely excelled in her new role, organizing cultural events, managing the household's growing collection of foreign literature, and even occasionally advising on international protocol matters. Their private lessons had evolved into something richer and more complex. They had worked through dozens of classic works, from Tolstoy to Toni Morrison, from Kafka to Kazuo Ishiguro. Each book opened new perspectives, challenged old assumptions, and deepened their understanding of the human experience across cultures and time periods. But more than that, they had developed a partnership based on intellectual equality and mutual respect that Kim had never experienced with anyone else in his life. One evening in early spring, as cherry blossoms began to appear in the palace gardens, they sat together discussing poetry once again. They had come full circle, returning to Emily Dickinson, the poet who had started their journey together. "Listen to this one," Jisun said, reading in English. "I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd advertise. You know." She looked up with a slight smile. "In a way, that's what we are, isn't it? Two nobodies in the midst of all this power and formality, finding each other." Kim laughed softly. "I'm not sure anyone has ever called the supreme leader of North Korea a nobody before. It's refreshing, actually. You know what I mean? When we're here, in these moments, you're not the supreme leader and I'm not the cultural liaison. We're just two people who love books and ideas and the beauty of language." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "These hours with you, Jisun, they've changed me. I see the world differently now. I lead differently. I think about my decisions not just in terms of power and politics, but in terms of human stories and consequences." "I'm glad," she said, "but you should know that you've changed me too. You've shown me that curiosity and learning don't have to be dangerous. That even in the most controlled circumstances, growth is possible. You've given me hope." There was that word again. Hope, the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. "What do you hope for, Jisun? When you think about the future, what do you see?" She considered the question carefully. "I hope that someday, what we've found here, this freedom to learn and grow and question, I hope that becomes available to everyone. I hope that people won't have to hide their books or whisper their questions. I hope for a world where curiosity is celebrated, not suspected." It was a radical hope, one that challenged the very foundations of their society. And yet, Kim found himself moved by it. "That's a beautiful vision. I can't promise I can make it reality, but I can promise that I'll think about it, that I'll consider how to create more space for learning and growth within our system. That's all I can ask." Supreme Leader, they sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of their conversations settling around them. Finally, Kim spoke again. "Professor Chen wrote to you recently, didn't she?" "I saw the report." Jisun nodded. "Yes. She's getting older, and she wanted to make sure her collection of books finds a good home. She's offering to donate her entire personal library to our program, thousands of volumes in multiple languages. It would be an incredible resource. Then we should accept. I'll arrange for a special import license and a secure facility to house the collection. It will be a memorial to her dedication to education and a foundation for future learning." Jisun's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Supreme Leader. That would mean everything to her, and to me." As their session ended and Jisun prepared to leave, Kim stopped her with a question. "Do you ever regret it? The risk you took, speaking English on that phone, knowing you might be discovered?" She smiled, the same brave smile he had seen that first night when she discussed her love of learning. "Not for a single moment. That risk brought me here. To this life, to you. How could I regret that?" After she left, Kim sat alone with his thoughts. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write, something he had never done before, his own poem, in English, influenced by all the literature they had studied together. In marble halls, where power dwells, a whisper of another tongue broke through the carefully crafted spells and taught this heart its song. Not of conquest, not of might, but of words and hope and grace. She brought to my controlled world light and gave isolation a human face. What future holds I cannot see, but this I know with certainty, that Maid who spoke in English clear, changed everything by being here. It wasn't great poetry, he knew. The meter was awkward in places, and the rhymes were simple, but it was honest, and it captured something true about this extraordinary chapter of his life. He folded the paper and placed it in his private safe, a secret record of a secret relationship that had transformed him in ways he was still discovering. Outside his window, spring was arriving in Pyongyang. The city remained orderly and controlled, just as it always had. But within one mind, within one heart, something had shifted. The Supreme Leader had learned that power and humanity were not mutually exclusive. That strength could include compassion, and that sometimes the most important revolutions happened quietly. In private rooms, over books of poetry, and conversations about hope. Jisun continued her work, expanding the cultural liaison program, corresponding with Professor Chen, and meeting twice weekly with Kim for their lessons. To the outside world, it was a professional arrangement. But they both knew it was much more than that. It was a friendship, a partnership, and a shared commitment to the idea that learning and growth were fundamental human needs that transcended politics and ideology. Years later, when historians would write about Kim Jong-un's leadership, they would note subtle shifts in his approach, a slightly more nuanced understanding of culture and human nature, a willingness to consider perspectives beyond the traditional ideological framework. They would speculate about what caused these changes, never knowing about the maid who spoke English, the books that crossed borders, and the late-night conversations that challenged everything. And in a small office in the cultural wing of the palace, Jizun would continue her work, organizing libraries, teaching language classes to select students, and guarding the secret of those transformative lessons that had changed lives and, perhaps in small ways, the course of a nation. The story that began with an overheard phone call had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted, a quiet testament to the power of literature, learning, and human connection to transcend even the most rigid boundaries and create understanding where none had existed before. Hope, that thing with feathers, continued to sing in the souls of two unlikely friends, its melody audible only to them but no less real for its privacy. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like.